Article 2, on the method of metaphysics. Although metaphysics is first among real sciences, it is not altogether first, for it presupposes both epistemology and logic. Systematically, indeed, epistemology precedes metaphysics, for the latter presupposes the possibility of knowledge, which epistemology examines. Further, insofar as metaphysics uses the rules of logic and the theory of relations, logic precedes it. But no other science, as physics, chemistry, biology, cosmology, psychology, mathematics, etc., needs to be presupposed by the metaphysician. So no metaphysical conclusion depends on things established by the natural philosopher or physicist, as some recent authors falsely suppose. The starting point. Every science takes as its beginning some principle or principles that are both evident and necessarily true. The given datum from which such principles are drawn by the metaphysician is the fact or experience of something real. Such experience is inseparable from the conscious life of man, for whether we think or will or feel or experience some motion of spirit, we are always conscious of our experience is a fact or something real. This fact of experience is expressed in this proposition, something is. This very evident proposition, although it is in itself a necessary one, as will be shown later, is yet a proposition that for us is purely contingent. Hence, in order to preserve the condition of Aristotelian science that principles be necessary, we can infer something necessary from the contingent proposition something is. Namely, the proposition that the existence of something is possible, or that there is no repugnance between something and existence. For Scotist well observes, quote, I say that although things other than God are in fact contingent in respect of actual being, they are not so in respect of potential being. So things that are contingent with respect to actual existence are necessary with respect to possible existence, as that although it is contingent that man exist, yet his existence as possible is necessary. Likewise, from the other givens of experience, we can infer conclusions that are both evident, that is, from the principles about their adherence, and necessary, and that we use these givens and principles constructing our metaphysical science, as, for example, the principle that something that is not eternal is possible, something that is contingent, transient, and changeable, etc., is possible. The name being, like the name thing or something, which, unless otherwise noted, signify the same as being, is used by use to designate everything and anything that is not repugnant to existence, whether it exists actually here and now, or not actually, but already exists in its causes. On the 10 categories, or on the classification of experienced being. Since we experience not just one being or real something, but several and diverse things, it belongs to the metaphysician also to describe and reduce to general classes the reality we experience. Famous is the division of Aristotle into 10 categories or predicaments. These 10 categories are substance, quantity, quality, relation, action, passion, when, where, position, and possession. Note on the name category. Etymologically, the Greek word category signifies a public accusation or charge and derives from the verb to accuse. So it is a forensic word that Aristotle uses in a special sense to designate logical attributes and predication, for he sees a likeness between the mind and a judge. Therefore, the act of the predicating mind is said to be a judgment, and that which is predicated of the subject is said to be an accusation. Now, since every accusation or predication pronounced of a subject falls under one of 10 ultimate kinds, these supreme kinds are called categories. But insofar as the predicaments are first intentions predicated of the nature of things, they belong, according to many neo-scholastics, not only to logic, but also to metaphysics as the supreme kind of limited real being. Hence, they say, the categories are to be defined as the supreme kinds or ways in which things can exist in nature, or more briefly, as the kinds of real beings. What sort of reality can be put into the categories? Scholastics distinguish between those that are directly fall under the categories and those that only indirectly or reductively do so. Nothing can be directly placed in a category, save a being real, finite, and essentially one. 1. Real, to exclude all beings of reason and scotistic formalities, which are not things but aspects of things. So it is vain to ask whether animality, rationality, etc. are substances or accidents, for animality is not a thing but a perfection whereby a thing, an animal, is an animal. 2. Finite being because in order for a thing to be properly reduced to some kind, it must be a metaphysical composite, that is, composed of genus and differentia. But God is not metaphysically composite, and so is not properly reduced to a category or a supreme kind. Although the notion of substance is predicated of God and creatures, and indeed univocally according to Scotists and many non-Thomists, such a notion of substance is not predicamental, but transcendental, on which see below. 3. Being essentially one, that is, a being that has a single natural essence, whether simple or composite, because what is not essentially one can exist in several categories. Hereby are excluded beings per accidens, for example, moral unities, family, flock, army, etc., artificial unities, panels, table, house, etc., or unities merely of aggregates, as mixed composites. Also excluded are the integral parts that lose their essential unity if separated from the things of which they are parts, as hand, head, etc. Parts as such in constitutive metaphysical principles are such as contemplative modes, are said to be reductively contained in the category of a thing that they belong to, and thus the rationality and animality of man can be reduced to substance. Artificial things that are reduced partly to substance, the matter they are made of, and partly to quality, their accidental forms. A moral unity, a family, etc., is reduced to substance by reason of their persons, and relation by reason of paternity, sonship, etc. Beings of reason, too, can be reduced in some way by the analogous extrinsic relationships, e.g., point is reduced to the category of quality, ignorance to the category of quality, knowledge falls under quality, etc. Various problems have been raised about Aristotle's categories. Is the classification adequate or sufficiently comprehensive? For some say that motion is perhaps a distinct kind. Others say the categories go beyond what is sufficient, for the last 6 categories can be reduced to the category of relation. Others dispute whether relation is really distinct from the related things. And indeed we can ask if all the predicamental things are in the strict sense, as Scotus and Thomas reckon them to be, or if, as Occam says, only some are, namely substance and quality. These questions seem to me of little moment, and so let him dispute them who will. The categories that a neo-scholastic metaphysician is accustomed to treat specifically are substance, quality, and relation, but these notions will be sufficiently expounded by us in the diverse treatments of the disjunctive attributes of transcendental being. On some transcendental properties of the being we experience. Besides these categories, many other things about the reality of experience need to be taken note of. Among such things are, for example, certain transcendental attributes, namely those that do not fall under the category properly speaking, and so, in Scotistic terminology, are transcendence. For we speak being as many composite, changeable, contingent, caused, relative, etc. 2 facts among these are very important as principles for the metaphysician in his speculation, namely, the fact of the plurality and changeableness of reality, and the plurality of things. No one can rationally doubt that several things exist. This question is not the question whether there is anything outside ourselves, for when the metaphysician begins his speculation, he is indifferent whether anything exists outside himself. It is sufficient for him to admit that he has many thoughts, sensations, etc., for these are indeed real things. The changeableness of things. The changeableness or change of things, taken here to be primarily indubitably fact, is not understood strictly as importing a subject distinction from the change, whether the subject loses or acquires. We only wish to say that the fact we immediately experience as real begin to be and cease to be, or in other words, that they are in the state of becoming. This fact is expressed in the aseretic proposition, something is transient, or in the modal proposition, something transient can't exist. On the method of metaphysics. The method of metaphysics is not strictly deductive or inductive. If by deduction and induction are meant demonstrative or a priori proofs and scientific inductions respectively. The method is not deductive, because the metaphysician does not have as principles things that are simply prior, but things that are simply posterior, that is, that which is or that which can be changeable, caused, transient, etc. Nor is it inductive, because the scientific induction of the natural sciences is per se unable to give us anything but probability. Hence, although the method of proceeding in metaphysics, as is the first philosophy, ought to be quote, to demonstrate through essential causes simply prior and more known, and especially through the highest causes. Nevertheless, we do not thus know it, nor is it found in the treatment of Aristotle. Ask if you find in the whole of his book one demonstrative metaphysical proof. For because of the weakness of our intellect, it is from sensible things and things that are less known in themselves that we get to knowledge of immaterial things. And these are known in themselves and should, in metaphysics, be taken as principles of knowing other things. Scotist, Prologue to Metaphysics. This way of proceeding is what is simply posterior, namely, from real beings as we experience it, namely as contingent, cause, transient, etc., to things that are necessarily required as conditions sine qua non of its existence, can be called a sort of metaphysical reduction. It is called reduction, that is, reductio, because of the mind, as it were, is led back to the data of immediate experience, to the conditions and hidden causes on which they depend. Metaphysical is added, because this reduction seems to differ from reduction in the natural sciences. For reduction is found in these two, namely to theories and hypotheses from which, as from conjecture, conditions, and causes, the effects that are empirically observed can follow. This method of natural sciences, which is called hypothetico-deductive insofar as it regards the verification of theories, is also called inductive induction insofar as the cultivation of the sciences create a certain theoretical law or explanation from their own mental fertility. But none of these theories is so certain that no other theory or hypothesis can be thought up. And so such theories, although they are not far distant from at least a practical certainty, do not go beyond probability. In metaphysics, on the contrary, when once it is conceded, for example, that some finite being is not sufficient to itself for its existence, but requires some explanation outside itself, then it follows no other theoretical explanation can be found, save something non-finite. Likewise, a caused being can be explained only by an uncaused being, a transient being by something permanent, a contingent being by something necessary, and so on through the other disjunctive attributes that are contradictorily opposed with respect to being. For although caused being and uncaused being are not contradictories, for there could be a third between them, namely non-being, nevertheless, caused and uncaused are mutually contradictory in respect to the same subject, just as white and non-white are mutually contradictory in respect to of the same man. Hence, to deny that all beings are caused is the same as to assert that some being is uncaused. And in this sense, there is given a metaphysical reduction, not just one theory among many possible explanations, as is the case in the natural sciences, but rather, once the necessity is conceded of some explanation of the existence observed in something other than itself, metaphysical reduction gives, by virtue of the law of contradiction and excluded middle, only one possible theoretical solution. And in this sense, metaphysical conclusions exceed the possibility found in the theories of the natural sciences. So the certitude of the metaphysician can have seems to be the highest that the human intellect can naturally achieve in any theoretical science about real things.